Hello, welcome to the Media Club. I'm your host, Matt Deegan. In the show today, why do YouTubers and podcasters want government recognition? Tim Burrowes of Unmade Media joins us to discuss the perils of securing a mortgage as a digital creator. Also on the show, amid Glastonbury controversy and Channel 4 picking up a supposedly partial doc on Gaza, does the BBC need to reset its news coverage? Edelman's Karin fills us in. All that plus, after years of conglomerates and consolidation, is the media business about to get a lot simpler? And in the Audio Network Media Quiz, we try out another shiny floor format destined for primetime. Probably. That's all coming up in this edition of the Media Club. Come on in. Welcome back to Karin. Welcome to the show for the first time, Tim. Tim, you're over from Australia.
Yes, lovely to be here in the Dream Factory. And, even more lovely to be in London in a week like this. A week ago I was chipping ice off the car windscreen in Tasmania, and here I am now, I think earlier in the week, maybe wishing I was back there. But
well,
yeah.
You've got a kind of interesting media background, kind of in the UK, maybe best known for Media Week and being there for Media Week here.
So Media Week was my first sort of foray into writing about the media industry. So that was here in the UK, where, you know, the Media Week, as it was very much about the relationship, the commercial relationships from media sales and the media agencies. Then a short foray into Dubai, where I launched was the launch editor of Campaign's Middle East edition. And then, yes, about 20 years ago, I got the call to head across to Australia. Thought I'd do that for a couple of years, and here I am, an Australian.
Yeah, so you ended up running Mumbrella, which I guess when it started was a sort of reaction to the existing media titles that were in the market, was very kind of fleet of foot and new. You then sold that business a few years ago, and then you ran your kind of own, more kind of creator-led media empire, sort of Substack-esque thing.
Yeah, that's right. So I was part of the team that started Mumbrella in 2008 against two very kind of traditional publications, you know, both sort of weekly print titles at the time. So we sort of came through the middle, just did all of those traditional B2B publishing things, you know, running conferences, running awards, running events, but just not having a print component. Yeah. As you say, sold in towards the end of 2017, stuck around for a while. Then ended up, I was lucky enough to be part of the Substack program that they did for a while of funding some journalists to come in. So Substack funded our first year of Unmade, and then when we had the opportunity to be part of the team that bought back Mumbrella earlier this year, we now have Unmade and Mumbrella both part of the same family. Yes,
interesting to return back to the old place. So who have you? So you've now got your Media Club membership. Who are you adding to our roles as your plus one?
It's very exciting to have the opportunity. So Matthew Prince, I'm going to nominate, the CEO of Cloudflare, which is one of those organisations which we don't really know what it is, but it's there and we don't appreciate it until it's not. So it powers the back end of most media publications we know.
It's like a big cache, isn't it, that sort of stops security coming, stops kind of people doing nefarious things, keeps your site up, and big sites.
It is, and it will just sort of, if you're getting a lot of demand, then it will cope with that demand for you. Now, this week, Matthew declared Content Independence Day. Now, really what this is, and it was actually great PR, because of course it framed it around blocking the AI scrapers. So it's arguably what the media world should have done 15 or 20 years ago when they lost the ground to Google and search. And this time there's the opportunity, maybe, just maybe, for media owners to stand by and monetize their content. So it's nice. It made me think of Die Hard, that line of "Welcome to the party, pal."
Also, they can make large scale impacts on a lot of sites. Obviously, people can opt out of this if they want to. I guess it also helps them save on bandwidth as well. I mean, they're kind of a bandwidth company too, and a lot of these scrapers are sort of non-stop scraping kind of them.
Look, one of the fascinating things is how quickly the demand has spiked. Like, you know, we actually noticed just last weekend on Mumbrella, suddenly we started running slow because we were getting so much AI scraping going on. So, you know, that's a thing. And also frustratingly for media owners, of course, the way it works with bandwidth is we're paying them for the privilege of them scraping our content. So, yes, let's band together and do something about it.
Well, he's a good addition. He can also fix our website, so that's good too. Karin, who are you going to add to our list this week?
So I'm going proper old school. I'm picking a legend of the British media who's probably already in the media club because she deserves to be. But I've been watching a lot of Wimbledon, and I just want to give props to Claire Balding, who always does such a fantastic job of chairing all the coverage for for Wimbledon on BBC. And I think I particularly want to take this moment to kind of just represent the work that they do on that show throughout the piece, because BBC's right to broadcast Wimbledon is potentially it's coming up by 2027. It may or may not still be with BBC. Now, interestingly, of course, the way that Ofcom's regulations are, Wimbledon is one of the kind of tier 1 sports that has to be free to air. So that's really nice. So it will be, need to be broadcast free to air in some way, but they can also share the coverage out. So
if you look at what Discovery have done, I mean, you don't get a lot. There's nothing on that doesn't have to be on.
Yeah. I mean, I watched the French Open. I'm a big tennis fan, so I watched the French Open on TNT. I had to buy a subscription to do it. Got a bit grumpy about it, even though the coverage was fantastic. So, yeah, I think just let's take a moment to represent Claire.
No, great broadcaster. And I mean, Odd is sort of a super freelancer, really. Yeah. She does that, Crufts on Channel 4, to be able to cope with all those things. She'd be an excellent member. I think
just loves the sports.
A lot of fun as well. I mean, it's interesting, both Glastonbury and Wimbledon are perhaps up for grabs in a few years' time.
They might be glad to be rid of Glastonbury.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about that a bit later. I mean, both of them have done incredibly well off the BBC's coverage.
Yes.
And it's for sports rights holders, it's... a lot of them have taken the money, and the success of their sports have dropped. So it's a big decision, isn't it, for sports owners to decide what they want?
Funnily enough, I was at a conference this week, the MADFest, and listened to Martin Sorrell present, and he was making the point that sports rights, particularly live sports, are the one thing that are holding up for the traditional owners. And when I was looking at my AI transcript, rather than transcribing it as live sports, it transcribed it as life support, which feels appropriate in the circumstances.
It does. I mean, essential for linear television, and also the thing that Netflix and the streamers really want to take on next, isn't it?
You mentioned Martin Sorrell. Can I just deviate into a wild tangent? Did you see his comments where he was asked about what he thought the future for agencies would be? And he said, well, I think they might need to think about breaking them up. And I thought that is the most hilarious thing I've ever seen. The single man who created WPP as, an integration powerhouse. Now he's running his own smaller shop. And funnily enough, he thinks maybe the big boys should be broken up. Just blissfully hilarious.
We start with something of an existential crisis this week. After consulting thousands of independent creators this week, YouTube released a report saying the UK government needs to recognise their contribution to the creative industry. This also comes after Audio UK called last week for pretty much the same thing for podcasters, saying podcasting and audio are no longer fringe media. They are vibrant, fast-growing industries that reach millions of listeners, create thousands of jobs, and showcase British creativity to the world. Karin, what does it matter what the government thinks? Why do all these people want their blessing?
Well, I mean, it's not just kudos, although they do like the kudos. I think, the way that we report our statistics changes a lot about how industries get funded, get respected, are able to accrue funding from investors and so forth. And right now, YouTube and I think we'll come on to podcasting in a bit, is not broken out in that way. So it's not fully reflected, and it's treated more as a DIY media as opposed to the truly professional media that we know it to be. So these things do have lots of impacts in terms of kind of how seriously they're able to be treated. As I say, funding inflows, and even just accurately representing what the media industry today looks like.
I think there's an interesting bit both, but particularly on the audio side, isn't recognised in the government's creator group, and radio's done 100 odd years. I think it deserves surely to be on there.
Look, I guess so, and I was kind of amused by this suggestion of the minister for influencers, which is perhaps a little self-serving, but you can see the attraction of it, because it just gives it that extra level of legitimacy.
And the tax credits thing is interesting. Audio UK have really been pushing for tax credits for podcasters. I mean, Karin, there's a bit of a question whether we're still even going to see the tax credits survive or be expanded for telly. I mean, the government are sort of short of a bubble too. Is Audio UK's demands going to fall on deaf ears?
I mean, we'll wait and see. I don't think the government is minded. The government is scrambling to find money under every sofa cushion. So I don't think they're going to be necessarily looking to kind of add extra tax credits for the podcasters. Although I would argue that it would be a better place for them to spend their money than the kind of massive shift that they're trying to make to support AI, just in terms of where the money actually ends up. Because there is a huge UK-based podcast industry. All the AI work is actually, it's based in the US. It's not contributing enormously to the UK economy. So, yeah, I think there would be some argument for it, but it doesn't feel like that's the way the government's mindset is. I would love to be wrong.
I think one of the issues as well with tax credits is suddenly become such a political hot potato because of the whole US situation with anything that looks like a subsidy. Suddenly
Mr. Trump is not very happy about
Trump
that.
has a problem with it. We heard what he said about the film industry and standing firm against that. So all of a sudden there's just this extra political dimension which just makes it, I think, possibly just too hard.
Yes, easy to ignore or to punt into the long grass. But I mean, they're right, aren't they? I mean, you're interesting in that you worked for big media, you had a largest organisation with Mumbrella. Then you kind of became a creator. Did it reset your views when suddenly you were sort of just you and your keyboard?
Well, I suppose I guess because we got to the point with Mumbrella, which it had become quite big, but it started off as me in front of a screen and a WordPress template.
Yes.
So I suppose it felt really more like going back. It was quite deliberate. I ended up on Substack though because I was fascinated by that as a format, and of course it's particularly friendly and designed for individuals or small groups of people. The tools are so good. It did 15 years on or whatever, it did feel like a bit like going back to those early exciting days of WordPress.
And do any of these stories kind of chime with you with what's happening in Australia at the moment? Where's the evolution in media? Is it just reflecting what's happening here as well?
Yeah, look, I think one of the things is I think we are seeing kind of a simplification of things to a certain extent. So if you look at kind of some of the ownerships of certainly the listed media companies, Nine would be the biggest locally listed company.
It's a big TV network.
Yeah, big TV network. Back in 2018, they merged with Fairfax Media, which was one of the big publishers. Now they're in the process of selling their real estate platform, Domain, which they owned 60% of, which has given them a little bit of a fund. Now they've spent some of that money on acquiring the Premier League rights from Optus, which was one of the local telcos. So it certainly feels like what Nine are doing is they're re-simplifying to being predominantly, certainly at the centre of it, a live sport company. Still doing lots of other things as well. But we're similarly seeing a simplification of a couple of the major audio companies. So Southern Cross Austereo, who are one of the players, have sold their TV licenses to go audio only. Just this week, ARN Media, the other player, and they're sort of aligned with iHeart kind of globally. But they owned a big creative agency. They've just sold their stake in that. So everyone seems to be like re-simplifying.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's like a reaction to a more complicated world. So you want to make things simpler for your investors or for your clients.
No, it's interesting. Every market has its own problems, and then it faces the wins that come particularly from America and for AI. Someone else that's had a bit of a tumultuous week is the BBC. Every week is a tumultuous week for the BBC, with uproar over a Glastonbury live stream that included an incitement to violence for the Israeli army, and then news that the most recent Gaza doc was to be canned, and then it was picked up by Channel 4. I mean, Karin, this is sort of standard issue BBC disasters that come on. I'm slightly torn by this. I'm always, is this in the cock-up category or in the sort of conspiracy category? And have they been unlucky, or is this a a problem of their own making?
Yes. But I do want to thank you very much for coming to me, because anybody who's asked to speak on Israel-Gaza related issues always comes out well of it. So I look forward to my immediate cancellation.
Yes.
But yeah, I think I would take the two things a bit separately, because for me, the Gaza documentary is a question of editorial judgment. The Glastonbury one is, they were quite unlucky, to be fair. And I think they're already starting to look again from a Glastonbury point of view. And I've seen some reports that maybe live broadcasts are, going the way of the dodo, because it's just not safe enough for brands like BBC to do a live broadcast anymore, or a live stream, indeed, as it was not even a broadcast.
I thought it was fascinating how nobody who was reporting on it sort of understood what it was that was broadcast and how it was broadcast. Yeah. So, as I understand it, it was on iPlayer, on one of the sort of sub-channels, Watch a Stage. Yep. It's a stage that's sort of lower down the list. I imagine thousands of people watching it, if that.
So it was available on the BBC iPlayer, but it was not on BBC One in any way, shape or form. And I think it was misreported as if it was.
Yeah, and then you could, because of the nature of these things, you could pause it and go back and see it. So if you weren't offended the first time, you could rewind and be offended. And I think there was a bit where they could, if they pulled it, it would have been a bit of a technical pain in the arse. And I think that's what drove a lot of the decision. But of course, it's Israel-Gaza, so...
But it's Israel-Gaza, so, any content in that area is really challenging. And of course, as a public broadcaster, you have to be particularly concerned about anything that could be legally in the territory of a threat to violence, leaving aside the political situation. So they were they were in a very tough situation, could have certainly dealt with it better, but I don't think anyone could reasonably argue that they could have known what was about to happen. They could have technically dealt with it a bit better, but I think that was in the category of unlucky.
I suppose the issue was Bob Vylan, absolutely, they couldn't have seen it coming, but then Kneecap, there was a little bit more warning, wasn't there? And of course, they were probably a bit better prepared then to react to that.
And also, I mean, there's a bit of this, what's the story every year? How dare the BBC send all these people to Glastonbury? So, a lot of which are actually volunteers and aren't in hotels, and just it's nice to send people, but also they are working on it. Yeah. And so I bet there's a bit of they haven't got as many people as they used to that cover a lot of these things. Also, didn't help that Tim Davie did make a decision on the day about this too. But then on the Gaza documentary, the BBC chose not to put it on air, and instead Channel 4 kind of picked it up. I mean, this is where it was a little more of an editorial decision by the BBC, who basically said that they sort of thought the documentary was fine, but they were kind of concerned it would give the impression of being impartial. I mean, that's pretty dangerous.
It's really tricky territory. And I think, and the fact that Channel 4 broadcast it the next day, it was the very next day, I think, of when the BBC was meant to broadcast it, shows you how dangerous territory the BBC is operating in, and what a fine line they walk and frankly stumble over quite a lot of the time. Even though Channel 4 is also a public broadcaster in a different guise, it is. On the one hand, it is a question of editorial judgment that they are perfectly free to make. On the other hand, if they come out and say, effectively, we did it because we thought it was a bit politically sensitive, even though we think it was editorially fine, then you start to ask, well, how can in a conflict that has two sides in which horrific things are happening, journalistically, you would like to be able to say what we're doing is editorially making judgments in the best interests of finding the truth and reporting it to our audience. But I think you can argue it either way, because I also think the BBC also has a right to make editorial judgments based on its own role as the type of public broadcaster that it is, and Channel 4 has a right to make its own editorial judgments. So,
well, also, I thought it was fascinating from a PR position. So you've got everyone arguing how dare the BBC pull this documentary for PR reasons, whilst in the same week they're pilloried for not pulling a thing and being terrible, generating loads of bad PR. Yeah. It's like this is what they were trying to ward off with the doc.
they're in a no-win situation.
Yeah.
And I think then you have the added layer. There's the letter that went out to Robbie Gibb, who's on the BBC board. We've talked about him many times on this podcast before. And so there are some allegations. There's some question whether he was involved in that editorial decision. If that were true, then again, that would be troubling and not what you would like to see. And the board is not meant to be interfering at that level. So there's another layer. There's another turn of the screw that we have to look at. And then, of course, a letter went out from hundreds of creatives across the UK, again, objecting to Robbie Gibb, who I think has plenty to answer for.
I mean, Tim, it's interesting. I mean, the ABC in Australia, then you do basically a similar show to this on the ABC. I mean, they face similar issues that the BBC do. It's in the interests of other media companies to give them a kick in.
Yeah, they do. So yes, declaration of interest. Yeah, I do present Medialand, but I'm not a spokesperson for the ABC. But yeah, they've certainly been quite heavily criticised for what some people have seen as timidity in how they report the conflict. The absolute flashpoint, though, was there was a presenter, just a fill-in presenter. This was the Christmas before last for a week. She had shared some posts about the human rights situation in Gaza, and there was a lobbying campaign which went into the chair at the time. What we then learned later, because there was a court case, was that she passed on these messages internally, put the management under pressure until they took this presenter off the air, Antoinette Lattouf. They took her off the air halfway through her only shift of what was only going to be a week. She went to court, successfully sued that she was wrongfully terminated. So that result only came in last week. And reading the judge's decision is absolutely excoriating of the internal decision making. You know, it was very clear that the management were lobbied and were influenced by the lobbying and were very concerned about how things would come across. So it's hard to argue that they weren't swayed.
Yeah. I mean, Karin, there is a PR battle. I mean, it seems almost dreadful to talk about the media implications of a horrific humanitarian disaster, and from both sides issues that have happened, but there is active lobbying because they want their point of view, and we see lobbying in all forms of life. But it can be chilling, and particularly for media organisations, it's difficult. You can choose to live a much easier life, can't you, if you choose to cover some other stories? I think
the Gaza-Israel conflict, I think, is probably the most difficult and no-win situation of anything that we deal with in PR. And without naming any names, we have clients who have been, gotten into hot water for this. And literally, in several cases, not because they have taken any position on the conflict whatsoever, right? Tangential things happen. But because there is so much heat on both sides of this, because, as you say, it's a violent and horrible conflict, and both sides think the other is entirely responsible. It is a no-win situation, and so I am not surprised, considering what we see from our clients, how desperately they're trying to stay out of this territory altogether, and how that does not save them. Right, there is no safe space away from the Israel-Gaza conflict, especially if you're a global company, as many of our clients are. I'm not surprised that the BBC is getting it as bad or even worse, especially considering the delicate political position that they're in. So the only thing that I can suggest, as I suggest to all of my clients, is sit down and have a good think about what your principles are. What is the mission of your organization? What are the core beliefs that drive you and your customers? Because people are going to criticize you no matter what you do. So decide what you stand for, decide what you do, come up with a good rationale for kind of what types of decisions you should be making under this basis, because there's nothing you can do to avoid the criticism. And in the BBC's case, I think they need to have a really good hard think about what does journalistic integrity mean to them, and specifically what is the journalistic role of a public broadcaster. And I think the whole conversation about balance, I think, in my personal opinion, has caused the BBC to lose track a little bit, because their mission is not balance. Their mission is serving the public, because sometimes stories are unbalanced. Now, Israel-Gaza is a particularly, fraught There's horrible things to say on both sides. So there's no heroes here. But I think you really just have to come back to your core mission. That would always be my advice to my clients, would be stop and think about what you do and why you do it. All of your decisions should be based on that.
I mean, for Tim Davie, who has done pretty well as running the BBC, I mean, there's been a lot of landmines that he has sort of stepped around, occasionally been hit by some shrapnel, but it's been relatively untouched. Yeah. I mean, we had Lisa Nandy say quite a tough line about whether the organisation should be looked at more closely. Do you think this is bad news for Tim? Is he going to survive this one?
I think the one thing you learn about the BBC is you never know which is the one that's actually gonna get them in the end. Yeah. And that's, if we look at the history of the last 20 years, as often as not, it ends in failure. But if you'd looked at the beginning of the crisis, you probably wouldn't have known that was the one that was going to do for them. So I suspect when it comes, it'll be a bullet that he doesn't hear whizzing towards him.
Yes, probably likely. Okay, when we return, more from our guests, including maybe asking Tim about MADFest and how that was. We'll see you in a sec.
Hello Media Club listeners, Patrick here from Podcast Discovery, the podcast marketing company, where this week we've been thinking about when it's time for a rebrand. For many people, the visual content that comes out of their podcast can be as useful as the audio itself. But how do you make sure that that content matches what listeners will hear when they play your show? And what if the look doesn't live up to the time and effort you put into making the podcast? To talk branding or anything else to do with podcast marketing, head to podcastdiscovery.com. That's podcastdiscovery.com.
A lot of telechat on the show today, but what do the Media Club and your favourite chat shows have in common? Well, aside from sharp conversation and standout guests, both shows are filmed in top-tier studios. These days, people aren't just listening to their podcasts, they're watching them too. And thanks to Podshop, our show doesn't just sound great, it looks great as well. So whether you're just starting your podcast journey or a seasoned pro like us, Podshop's the ideal space for recording content that stands out from the crowd, so you can focus on the talking and leave the rest to the experts. And for a limited time, you can get 25% off your first booking here at Podshop Studios. Just use the code MEDIACLUB when booking online at podshoponline.co.uk. So don't miss out. Head to the studio page at podshoponline.co.uk and claim your 25% off. Welcome back. Here's a few headlines we've been discussing in the club this week. Tony Blackburn has hit out Ofcom's decision to block Radio 2's Extra station, calling it a disgraceful decision from an organisation which is totally out of touch. Phil Riley of rival Boom Radio handed out an olive branch to Blackburn, though, telling Radio Today that if he ever wants to come join Boom Radio, the door is always open. Paramount Axe has now fallen in the UK, with news that MTV has cancelled shows Gonzo and Fresh Out UK, with most of its production staff exiting the company. It follows a more general policy of producing fewer local programmes in favour of shows that work in multiple territories. And in somewhat related news, CBS has settled with Donald Trump over their 60-minute interview with Kamala Harris. In a sign of how ridiculous the world is, it's likely that the $14 million check will perhaps go some way to help grease the wheels of the merger between Skydance and Paramount, which needs FCC approval. Links to all of the stories we talk about on the show are available on our Substack. Just go to themediaclub.com to sign up. It's free, and you get a lovely email from me every week. Just head to themediaclub.com. Karin, I mean, more chilling effects in American newsrooms. CBS following ABC's lead. It's going to be media companies giving in that pay for Donald Trump's library.
Yeah, he's doing very well out of it. We wouldn't legally want to call it bribery, so we definitely won't do that. Yeah. But it is very, very concerning to me how quickly and how comprehensively media companies are rolling over. And I think it's just a sign of what you're seeing, that it is now media conglomerates rather than journalistic practice that is taking place. I mean, the Kamala Harris interview was I actually saw it live. It was a pretty ordinary presidential election media interview, as you do. And I think the notion that a broadcaster should not broadcast an interview with one of the two major party political candidates close to the election just doesn't stand up to the laugh test.
I mean, when they put out the rushes, I mean, it was fine.
It was 100%. It was absolutely fine. There was nothing inappropriate about it. It is absolutely clear that Trump would have lost that case had it gone to trial. But it is in the media and company's best interest to not do that. So
it's going to be interesting, the 60 Minutes team and the CBS News team, about how they, do they do anything? Can they do anything? The drive for that business to be, sold is so important.
Yeah. It's out of their hands. It's really not a decision taken at the news level.
Yes. So, Tim, you've been here in the UK and you popped into the MADFest this week. Now, some people might know what this is, others might not. I think it stands for Media, Advertising and Disruption.
Yes, and then Fest for festival, obviously.
Yes.
And advertising people don't do conferences; they do festivals. It's a bit like the more slightly more famous Cannes Lions, the Festival of Creativity over in the south of France, which of course is a conference as well. So, but it's on a big scale. So it takes place at the old Truman Brewery on Brick Lane, and I'm told, and I believe the number, that it's more than 15,000 marketers coming through.
Wow.
So it's heaving, it's energetic. You really get the sense that most people there are for the kind of non-traditional part of the media. It's everything's digital. You couldn't go more than firstly, you couldn't go more than a few meters without seeing some very pale legs. But then you couldn't go very many meters without people talking about AI.
Yes.
That was absolutely the central thing. And of course, the real question and disruption around the communications industry generally, including that world of marketing, is jobs. So, Martin Sorrell in his talk, he kind of referred to sort of media planning and buying jobs, maybe 250,000 of them around the world, mostly going. One of the things which is just fascinating was he talked about a couple of Facebook and Google products. So one of them calls it PMax, which is, I think, Performance Max, and the other one is Advantage Plus. But effectively what they are, they're aimed actually at the moment at small advertisers or sort of SMEs, small and medium-sized advertisers. And the idea is, if you have a piece of advertising you need, you just give them the information. They create, this is all through AI, they create the ads, and then they just run the campaign for you. You don't know. It's just a magical black box, and you get the result at the other end. Now, that's quite fascinating.
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg was sort of saying, basically, just tell us what the product is and don't worry about anything else. We'll get it in front of the right people.
Yes.
And it's be fine.
And that's quite fascinating anyway. Now, Sorrell's argument was, okay, they'll do that. They'll make it work. And then they'll go to, as he puts it, enterprise, the big end of town. And then anyone who works in a creative agency or a media agency should really worry if that happens, because arguably the platforms have already got about 70% of the advertising slice of pie, which doesn't leave much left for everybody else, and maybe they're coming for a little bit more. That's certainly Sir Martin Sorrell's point of view. Of course, the founder of WPP, now doing S4 Capital.
Yeah, I was buying some Facebook ads actually the other week, which is not something I've done for quite a long time. I was partly doing it because I was like, I haven't done this for a while. I should get my hands dirty. And I always quite liked the targeting of it, work out the groups and who to target. And now Audience Max or the Audience Plus, it basically doesn't let you do anything. It's like, are you sure you want to go to the old version? Just you don't need to do any of this. And it's quite stunning.
It really
the
is.
direction they're going. Whether it works as well, it's hard to.
And that is the question, because you as an advertiser, you can't necessarily see what's actually going on. You just have to trust that it's getting the result. And of course, people love, in the advertising world, they love to talk about things like attribution modelling, in other words, deciding which part of the advertising actually worked. And of course, it should be complicated, because who is to say whether it was actually that ad that got people across the line rather than the poster or the billboard or the word of mouth or the newspaper ad for a car 10 years ago that influenced you to one day want it. But so long as it appears to be working, then I suspect advertisers will keep going with it.
Do you think there's an interesting challenge for sort of traditional media owners, even modern media owners, who are trying to keep up with this? Have they got enough products themselves to sell to their clients, or do they have to basically be we're the non-AI company?
There's definitely a little thing to be said about being, okay, we're the artisans, the bespoke people, we're the people for humans. You know, as you know, I own a small media business, and certainly we try for our position in the market to be the ones where, okay, when there's commoditized news, we'll do the opposite, because I do certainly in our niche kind of have a sense that often you'll see this kind of wave of press releases coming into the inbox, of which you sometimes suspect these were written with the aid of ChatGPT. And then I suspect that at some places they're then being rewritten to news stories with the aid of ChatGPT. Now, once every human has their own agentic AI to read it on their behalf, there's going to be an awful lot of news going through the cycle without any human involvement at all.
Yeah.
If no human produces it, no human reads it, is it even news?
I always think if you can't be bothered to write it, I can't be bothered to read it.
Just get your chatbot to do it for you.
Yeah. I'm interested in your kind of your sort of British Australian take back on Britain. You now sort of in both areas. I think you get to look at both sectors with an outside eye. Is there anything we should be learning from Australia, or vice versa?
Oh gosh, look, I tend to come back maybe once a year or so, and it's funny because I do notice just the little changes, like the billboards on the underground are moving now, or I can't seem to get the Standard in the way I used to, or gosh, the metro feels very thin these days. So there are all of those signals. I think the one I suppose kind of indicator for the wider world we saw out of Australia was the News Media Bargaining Code. So that was the law that effectively said that platforms that had a kind of unfair position in the market, and at the time they were really thinking of Google and Meta, could be forced into this mechanism whereby if they were designated by the government, they would have to negotiate with publishers about the value they derived. And it could then go to arbitrary kind of ruling on which of the two proposals was right, the publishers or the platforms. And they wouldn't pick something in the middle, they would pick one or the other, which was obviously quite risky for them. And rather than be designated, they did this whole series of deals to effectively give money to the publishers. This was about 4 years ago. It was a shakedown, in all honesty. You know, it was an absolute shakedown. But it did provide a lot of funding. You know, in the tens, if not the hundreds of millions for publishers. But Facebook has since said it's not going again.
It also inspired a lot of other countries to basically try and do the same shakedown.
It did in Canada, in New Zealand, and I think the platforms learned from what they did in Australia and stood firmer in other places. We're now seeing the Australian government, their new policy is what they're calling an incentive scheme, whereby they're certainly stating as policy that there'll be a digital levy on the platforms, but they can offset it against the deals where they do with the publishers. But that was before Donald Trump came back to power, and of course anything levy-based has suddenly become completely radioactive. So whether the Australian government actually has got the ticker to stick with the policy, we'll have to see. And
something we face in the UK as well with our own digital tax incentives. Okay, just enough time for the Audio Network Media Quiz. Let's see how much attention to the media our guests have been paying this week. What's this week's called? A Reversal of Fortunes, channeling the success of ITV's lateral thinking game show, The 1% Club. I will give you a media headline in reverse order. You just have to unscramble it and tell me what it all means. And once again, Alex at Audio Network has gamely taken up this brief from producer Matt and supplied a playlist to score today's quiz. So it's a best of three. Buzz in with your name if you know the answer. So Karin, you will say... Karin. And Tim, you will say...
Tim.
Let's play A Reversal of Fortune. Views, million, 60.1, with, record, viewership, Netflix, breaks, season, game, squid. Yes, go on, Karin.
So it's Netflix. The new Squid Game season's coming out and lots of viewership.
Yeah, so the Squid Game season 3 broke Netflix viewership records with 60.1 million views. Have you watched this season? I didn't watch it.
I have not. Now that I hear that there's going to be an English language one, it just feels like I can wait for that.
Just wait.
Okay.
Why bother to read subtitles?
Okay, time for reversal number 2. Time first. The 4 month A $8.99 audiences. Go on, buzz in if you think you know.
I'm waiting for you to say.
US charge to set news BBC.
Tim.
Yes.
That was the word I was waiting for, just to be sure. Yes, so the BBC are very likely to start charging overseas audiences, starting with the US, to view their wonderful content.
Yes, BBC News sets to charge US audiences $8.99 a month for the first time. I mean, it's I'm interested to see how well it does. Obviously, subscription is the way forward for lots of news publishers. Do you think the BBC should be in this market?
In the US or just in the paid media market in general?
In the US,
the BBC does really well in the US. So there's BBC America. It's very well reviewed, very well viewed, very well regarded. A kind of niche audience. So yes, definitely. I think the withdrawal of the BBC World Service in its kind of is to me, I think it's very disappointing, because I think it was a really powerful force for soft power for the UK writ large. So I'm not a fan of kind of raising additional barriers for people to consume BBC content overseas, because I think it's actually been very good for the country and very good for the BBC reputationally. But it's a potential revenue source. Let's see where it goes.
Okay, let's hear our final reversal. Rights Sports UK of value impact to pay TV in decline.
Tim.
Yes.
The perpetual prediction, which I've made this prediction many times myself and always been wrong, that the next round of sports rights are going to suddenly be worth less than the last one.
Yes.
And then every single time we are proved to be wrong, because, as Sir Martin Sorrell was saying on stage, the last thing which seems to hold up is live sport. So I know there's another prediction that the next rights round is going to go down. I don't believe a word of it.
Yes, it's Hugh Evans, 0-0, saying that it's going to go down. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. So I think that makes you, Tim, our winner. Congratulations. As part of the prize, you have to try and import the quiz to your own podcast media land.
I'm always happy to steal a good idea.
Good. My thanks to Tim Burrowes and Karin Robinson, and of course to Alex Audio Network for this week's Suite of Music. Remember, you can build your own license for multiple platforms anywhere, forever at audionetwork.com. That's audionetwork.com. So before we go, how can people keep up with your good work? Which social networks are you orbiting at the moment, Karin?
So I'm on Blue Sky, Karin JR on Blue Sky. I also have a Substack that I use for my own personal fiction writing to keep people up with my journey as an aspiring novelist. Still trying to sell my first book, and I've got my agent reading my second book yet. So that's my little plug for that. Watch the Space. Another kind of news from my side of things. I've been shortlisted. A paper that I've written has been shortlisted for the APG Strategy Awards. I had to do a presentation this week to see what colour my prize is going to be. They tell me I've won something, but I don't know if it's gold, silver, and bronze. So I'll find out in September. Have me back on, I'll tell you.
Good luck for that. And Tim?
All the usual podcast places. So please have a look for us for the ABC's Media Land, for Mumbrella and Unmade. Gosh, I do talk a lot.
That's good. Thank you both. And thank you to you for watching or listening as well. Remember, you can go to our website at themediaclub.com and sign up to our free newsletter, which we send out every week. My name is Matt Deegan. The producer was Matt Hill. It was a Rethink audio production with video support from Podcast Discovery. We'll see you next week.